And let me talk about those two types. Over a year ago, I had the great honor of participating in a symposium at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. The topic was the relation between hate speech and genocide. Experts on the massacres in Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur offered sobering accounts of how ethnic hate speech was used to rally people to kill their fellow citizens. My own talk focused on Kenya, where I've long conducted research. After a highly contested election in 2008, Kenyans experienced shocking violence along lines of ethnic, political, gender, and class differences. The Kenyan example was remarkable because for the first time in the midst of large-scale violence, thousands of people received and forwarded text messages that communicated hateful sentiments about other ethnic groups. When peace was reestablished, and these are just a couple photos from the incredibly violent conflict. When peace was reestablished, many ordinary Kenyans were mortified that they had participated in passing along messages that might ultimately have fueled violence. The examples we presented in the symposium last year led participants to conclude that hate speech can play a significant role in mass violence. But it was difficult to determine what should be done. Radio announcers and producers have been convicted of incitement to genocide, a controversial charge under international law. Comparing hate speech across contexts led us to identify the kinds of speech that often result in violence, and these are two kinds that raise red flags. Assaultive speech that conveys the capacity and willingness to do violence, and assaultive speech that expresses axiological opposition, and I'll address these in order. Some assaultive speech clearly includes direct threats to violence. You bleeping bleep, I'm going to kill you is a very simple example of that. Other threats are more indirect or veiled. Over the past month, as I start the spring by ridding my garden of invasive plants, I cannot help but think of a metaphoric means of calling for ethnic violence that has appeared in some agricultural communities across the globe. Pull out the weeds. Be sure to shake off the good dirt. Toss them away. Translation: get rid of people who don't belong here. Be sure they leave behind their property and any other valuables. Toss them away. Through metaphor, an ordinary productive activity is turned into a recipe for violence. The gardening metaphor is not used as a threatening call to action here in the United States, but it demonstrates that metaphors gain their meaning from context and culture. Former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin used this defense when she was recently accused of encouraging her supporters to use violence against their opponents. After the vote on health care, Palin wrote through her Twitter account, "Common sense conservatives and lovers of America don't retreat, instead reload. Please see my Facebook page." On that page was the same message, along with a map on which crosshair targets marked the districts of those who had supported health care legislation. Critics charged her with using the reload phrase to advocate violence. She answered by saying that those who follow her understand that she's using a powerful symbol to promote activism, not violence. This example illustrates not only the cultural defense against accusations of using speech to promote violence, but also the difficulty of clarifying or explaining one's meaning after the fact. Palin's struggle to control the interpretation of what she said suggests that public figures might want to tread carefully in using language, especially now. The general climate includes direct threats made against politicians, bullets found in at least one office, and vows by citizens to carry guns in close proximity of politicians. We saw the heat generated by those who packed heat when they rallied in a national park in Virginia just over the border from Washington, D.C. earlier this month. The concern expressed about whether the rally might lead to violence is not surprising, given the close proximity of highly charged rhetoric and firearms. How much this concerns you might depend on your view of guns, which can symbolize freedom or imminent destruction, or self-defense. Calls for violence by some rally participants, along with web postings that vowed violent reaction to any attempts to limit either speech or gun possession at the rally, raised red flags for myself, and I venture to say others. Let's not forget that this pressure cooker of a situation was heightened by the presence on the Washington, D.C. side of considerable armed force protecting the peace, the forces of the state on the other side. So this is the tenor of what we're dealing with in terms of the relationship between speech and violence. And I just wanted to end this with another example. You may not be able to read all of it, and I don't want to take the time to do it, but it's a depiction of President Obama as Obama, using Chairman Mao as a photo in the middle. And just a couple of the lines of this poem: raced into office like a Sooner, wooed young fools like a crooner, and I'll pop down to the bottom. It continues like that. I'll pop down to the bottom to the where I'd like to call your attention. The military should get him out sooner. And so another kind of connection between speech and violence that should give us pause. My second red flag: speech that expresses axiological opposition. Of course, not all partisan or positioned or political discussion is hateful speech. But conflict resolution educators take note when we hear the rhetoric of axiological opposition. This speech assumes a deep and unbridgeable gulf between oneself and another group. They are on one side of the axis, and we are on the other. The world lines up through this fundamental division, and you can put any number of adjectives or describers on either side. Us, them, we're industrious, they're lazy, we're right, they're wrong, we're worthwhile, and they are worth less. We have values, they don't. This kind of opposition, when it tracks ethnic, religious, or political lines, goes beyond viewing others as different, but rather renders them expendable and is often used to justify violence against the other group. Has the rhetoric of public discourse reached this stage? Is this what the various dichotomies are really getting at? Red state, blue state, liberal, conservative, for Obama, against Obama, the real Americans, un-Americans. Does each side mean to position the other as expendable, as axiologically opposed? I don't have the answer to that. I think we're in the midst of it, and I'd be interested in what others think on that point. Oppositional divisions and the strong rhetoric that accompanies them are not new for our nation. Much of Virginia bears the scars of the Civil War, which arguably was fought out of axiological opposition. The Cold War was a time of greatly insulting oppositional rhetoric. With the term communist being thrown around today, it's almost as if we're back in that time. Oppositional thinking and speech draws adherents by reducing the complexity of a scary world and offering a simple solution. You're with us or you're against us. Used instrumentally, especially by politicians and their operatives, to foster in-group cohesion and loyalty, axiological oppositions are very compelling and yet so dangerous in that they rely on stereotypes and fear instead of knowledge and the more complex reality of real human relationships. My examples so far have mostly focused on the content of speech. While not necessarily hateful and insulting, some of the speech heard in recent months conveys axiological opposition through its form. How do you treat the opposition as expendable through speech without saying it overtly? Well, there are a lot of techniques for this. You can interrupt and talk over someone, you can shout, you can talk loudly, you can refuse to listen, you can reject any argument or persuasive connection, and you can show what we in the field call autistic hostility, just a complete tuning out of the other. One doesn't say in words that you have no use for the other side, but you do it through words, through the form of speech. Well, a shouting match is only a good form of communication if you're trying to communicate that you care nothing about what the other person says or relatedly about them. After all, Don't all talk at once is one of the most cherished norms for conversation. Talk show host David Letterman asked President Obama about his view of last summer's healthcare reforms and other political speech when the president appeared on his show. President Obama responded, "One of the things you sign up for in politics is folks yell at you." In one sense, he was describing reality. But in stating what could also be interpreted as a norm for speech, he was taking the heat off ordinary citizens at the healthcare forums, as well as some politicians and others who had yelled directly at him. We might agree with this norm, or agree with it in some contexts, but it is also worthwhile to explore a variety of other norms for civil discourse and to articulate some different ways of speaking in public. So let me turn now to 3 quick examples of initiatives that encourage a different kind of public speech. When he took office as head of the National Endowment for the Humanities in 2009, Jim Leach, former Republican congressman and Ivy League professor, expressed dismay over contentious public discourse. Leach vowed to counter its ill effects by embarking on a 50-state American civility tour. In his speeches, he draws on historical examples to back up the excellent point that Americans have always had vigorous political debate and usually taken their unresolved differences to the ballot box. But given the current moment, he condemns the coarseness he sees in American public manners and the discordant rhetoric of our times. He argues that there is, after all, a difference between holding a particular tax, spending, or healthcare view and asserting that an American who supports another approach or is a member of a different political party is an advocate of an ism of hate that encompasses gulags and concentration camps. One framework of thought defines rival ideas, the other enemies. You hear in his example the condemnation of an axiological divide. In addition to his speeches, Leach has launched a program called Bridging Cultures to encourage more familiarity across differences among those in America's diverse population.